Welcome to the Gamers Tavern. Tonight, our guests are John Goodenough, who is a game designer of Talisman 4th Edition, Relic, Tide of Iron, and many other games. And we also have with us Andy Hopp, artist and designer behind the Low Life role-playing game for Savage Worlds, and the card game Dementalism, which is currently being kickstarted right now. So grab a drink from the bartender, but I wouldn't give him any lip if I were you. But go ahead and have a look around. We'll be back after these messages from our sponsors.
Hello, random stranger who's totally not just me using a different voice.
Well, hello, incredibly handsome stranger.
Hey, have you heard about the new Dementalism Kickstarter? It's totally awesome. It's this really great game, and I know you're gonna love it.
Really, tell me more.
Well, see, you play these guys who work for the Primordial Soup Kitchen, and a whole bunch of clones have escaped because of something you did, because you really suck at your job, and you have to go out and collect them before you get fired or fed to something horrible. It's super, super fun, I promise.
Oh yeah? How do I find it?
Oh, it's very, very simple. Just go to www.dementalism.com.
Really? It's that easy?
Yeah, and it's brought to you by Mother Earth Creations, the good people who brought you Low Life and other really awesome stuff.
Dude, I totally have to check that out.
In a world of perilous adventure, the forces of evil have triumphed. Those who remain uncorrupted by wickedness must rely upon monsters to fight against the darkness. Hi, I'm Ross Watson, and I'm talking about my new setting for the Savage Worlds RPG called Accursed. Accursed is a dark fantasy setting where classic monsters team up to fight witches, where the heroes must choose whether to embrace the curse that gives them monstrous power, or reject it and try to regain their lost humanity. Check us out at AccursedRPG.com or search for Accursed RPG on Kickstarter. Our campaign runs through October 13th, and we need your support to help make this world come to life.
So, you all meet in a tavern. Sitting in a dark corner is a man dressed all in black. Your host, Darryl Mott Jr. Your co-host, Ross Watson, unfortunately isn't available right now. He is off fighting a grue. But we do have with us two guests. The first is John Goodenough. Would you like to introduce yourself, John?
Hey, everybody.
And we also have Andy Hopp.
Hey everybody, it's me, Andy.
All right, Andy, so you're working on a Kickstarter, is that right?
That is correct, Darryl. Thank you for the segue. The current Kickstarter I'm working on is for Dementalism, the ingenious game of ingenious ingeniousness. It's a card game that takes place in my Low Life setting, which is also a role-playing game and a line of miniatures. Dementalism was actually funded by Kickstarter last year, but the current Dementalism Kickstarter is for at least 3 expansion decks for the game. The game's actually been really well received. It comes out in retail this month, end of this month. But even before retail, it's been doing really well at cons and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to be offering these 3 new expansion decks and a whole bunch of promo cards and also some limited edition miniatures that go along with it. If anyone wants to check it out, go to www.dementalism, DEMENTALISM.com, and that'll take you to the Kickstarter page.
And you also mentioned your role-playing game setting, Low Life. That was just kickstarted recently as well for a new edition.
Yeah, Low Life Redredged. Low Life came out in 2005 or 6. I think 6. It basically takes place gazillions of years in the future after humans are extinct. Everyone's evolved from cockroaches and Twinkies and the various things that have survived all the apocalypses. It's a really fun setting. I'm excited because it's branching out into so many new things. It's not just a role-playing game anymore. We've got, the card games and the miniatures. There's a board game that I'm working on, a game called Slog Pile I'm hoping to put out next year, which is like a stacking plastic slogs, which are like these Twinkie slug monsters on top of each other. It's kind of a Jenga-like game.
And John, I know Andy. I've met him at a convention before that I was covering for Cool News, but I never had the pleasure of meeting you, and I honestly did not know your name until Ross introduced me to you. And then I looked you up and I'm like, okay, yeah, I think he's qualified to talk about game design.
Yeah. I've been around for a while. I think probably the reason why I may seem rather hidden is because I bounced around doing a lot of different things. I started in the industry as an artist, as a freelance illustrator, working on various CCGs and board games. And as much as I love doing the artwork, I love the games. I'm a huge gamer, and working as a freelance illustrator, you'd maybe be able to illuminate a very small pocket of a universe. You'd get like 10 card commissions out of a whole game. But a game designer gets to build the entire world. So that started to appeal to me, of being able to create the entire setting, the whole world that you play the game in, instead of just illustrating a small portion of it. As soon as when passion started shifting into game design, Fantasy Flight Games had an opening for a developer, and I jumped on that and did that for a number of years, and had a lot of fun developing games, mostly fantasy adventure product lines like Talisman, Runebound, the World of Warcraft board game. And I currently work at Alderac Entergainment Group, AEG, and they're probably most famous for the Legends of the Five Rings setting, the CCG and the role-playing game. But I actually work in a board game department, so we do some cool crossovers here and there of making board games and card games in the L5R setting, but we mostly focus on just new, totally new games. One of the really fun projects that we're working on now is the Big in Japan series, and these are games that we've taken from Japan and are doing the English version of them with a couple of graphical or art facelift. But Japan has some really great budding designers, and they've kind of specialized in being able to create these really fun, dynamic games in tiny little packages. One of the games, Sail to India, is only 24 cards, but it feels like this big board game. And I mean, it's only 24 cards, but you get the experience of a big, meaty Euro game. So you get a lot of bang for your buck, and they're a lot of fun to work on.
And that really brings us to the topic we're discussing tonight, which is what makes a game fun? It's a really abstract concept, and it's also very subjective. Some people love some games, and some people don't love the same game, and sometimes for the exact same reason. So I'm wanting to get into a discussion of exactly what it is that makes a game fun. The first thing that pops to my mind is the idea of theme versus mechanics, especially when it comes to role-playing games and tabletop games both. Because if you look at a game like Settlers of Catan, I have tried many times to convince people to try that game out, and I sit there and explain to them, okay, you're settlers on this island, and you generate resources like lumber and minerals, and wait, now, come back, listen, it's really cool, trust me. And the theme sounds so boring, but the game is so much fun to play. There's also other games where the mechanics are, I don't want to sound negative, but looking at a game like Munchkin, the mechanics on Munchkin are pretty sloppy in a way, especially with the earlier editions of the game before they really refined the mechanics a lot. But the theme is so universal and so much fun for players of D&D and other fantasy role-playing games, then they've expanded into all these other genres and kept that same theme and tone to it. So even if the mechanics of the game are a little bit sloppy and it's really swingy, the game is still a lot of fun. So, John, what's your opinion on theme versus mechanics when it comes to designing a fun game?
If I had to create a spectrum of one thing on one side and one thing on the other, I probably the most overarching thing would be the challenge versus the experience. So I guess you could say mechanics could be the challenge and the theme could be the experience. I guess it's a little more, I view it as a little more all-encompassing. Another way of saying it is you could say a game has two different spectrums. It's intellect versus the social experience. So on one hand, you have chess, which is, it's all about a duel of wits, and I guess you could say it's all about the mechanics. It's all about two people pitting, their minds against each other, and there's really not a whole lot of social interaction. You don't sit and chat and talk. You don't tell jokes.
Check.
Yeah.
Check.
And you watch chess, and there's almost no talking at all. And you go to the opposite end of that spectrum, like Pictionary, where it almost has no mechanics. Like, it's almost not even a game. It's just an activity to promote social interaction. When it comes to like theme and mechanics, I kind of view it more as like the intellect versus the social experience. And the most popular games, at least the most successful ones, usually are the games that find a happy medium between the two. So you have the best of both worlds. You have a game that's mechanically interesting. It presents challenges. You feel clever by solving puzzles, but yet it also creates this experience that people tell funny stories along the way. It evokes some emotion. You actually hear people laugh, instead of taking the game too seriously. So I guess that's kind of how I view, if I was to create a spectrum, an overall spectrum, that's kind of how I would define it.
So if you would put something along the lines of, say, Paranoia is pretty high on that list, where it's got a lot of intellectual problem solving to it, and it's also a cooperative game, so everyone's sitting there talking the whole time and interacting with each other. Is that?
Yeah, right. Yep.
And Andy, I don't know if I need to ask you about theme.
Well, I would really, just paraphrase everything John just said, and I agree with all of it. But the most important thing, I think, to make a game really, really fun is it's got to be a different experience every time you play it. So there are a lot of games out there where once you've read all the cards, it's not funny anymore. I don't want to, I love Munchkin too. I think it's a great game, but that's one of those games where you kind of need 10,000 expansions for it, because it's all based on inside jokes that you get from playing the games, the role-playing games that it's based on. You have, every time you look at a card, you're like, oh yeah, I laughed at that card last time, so now I've got a million other cards to choose from, so it keeps it fresh, even though, like what you said, the mechanic of the game is really pretty simple and familiar. But I don't want to rag on Munchkin because it's a really great game. Plus, I don't want to ruin my chances of ever having a Low Life Munchkin made. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a new experience every time you play a game. But I think the ones that really keep you coming back are the ones that's what happens. Like, look at a game like Candyland or something like that, which I know that's probably all of our favorite games at this point in our lives. I know I love it, but there's absolutely no strategy involved whatsoever. And I know we're not talking about kids' games right now, but for me, to make a game extra fun, and I got to point out, I did not think about this beforehand because I didn't even know this was the theme of the show, so I'm kind of making this all up on the fly, so I'm going to talk over myself a lot.
Yeah, this podcast came together a little bit last minute.
That's okay. That's more fun. I love winging it. But anyway, I'm probably going to sound like I'm talking over myself, but that's just me, thinking faster than I talk, I guess. It doesn't have to be a new experience every time you play it, but it has to offer something new to the interaction. It can't be like, at least in my opinion, every time you play Settlers of Catan, people make different decisions, different moves every time. Even though the board could be the same every time you play it, if you set it up that way, you're going to have a different experience based on who's playing with you and the decisions everybody makes along the way. And I think that's very important in a game. There are a lot of games where you just, board games especially, where you just kind of roll a die and you land on the space and pick a card and do what it says, and there's not much decision making going on. And to me, those kind of games get pretty boring pretty quickly, as do games where it's just wandering around collecting things the whole time. I know we're talking board games and tabletop games, but we got that new Disney Infinity video game, and that's pretty much, you've got all these different characters to choose from, but basically all you do with them is wander around aimlessly collecting coins and things, and there's really not much challenge to it. It's just, you're collecting a different thing in each scene. So for me, I need a challenge. I need to be able to think about what I'm doing. I don't really enjoy games where there's no decision to be made or no strategy to be put into it. So, yeah, there's that. But as far as theme goes, to me, theme is at least as important as mechanics. Look at a game like Angry Birds or something like that. That started out as some catapult-flinging, tower-attacking game.
I remember playing that game when it was called Crush the Castle. And it was
exactly.
A trebuchet.
Yeah, and, no one besides you has heard of it, really. People have, but now they change the rocks to birds and the towers to pigs, and it's like the best-selling game of all time. So that's a game that is fun to play, but without the theme, it wouldn't be what it is at all.
Crush the Castle was a lot of fun, but yeah, the theme the theme really changes the tone.
It's the hook. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as far as RPGs go, all the books I write, are 90% fluff. I don't even put any game material like rules or anything like that in the book at all until you get to the appendices. Even the core rule book is story. Most of it is story, just taking you through the world and introducing you to the creatures and the characters and the way the world works, and then you get to the rules way at the end of the game. And for me, the reason I decided to do that is because, growing up and through college and everything, I had like every D&D book ever made basically for second edition, but there's no way I could ever play them all. So, I'd spend all my time, sitting on the toilet reading them, or, not always on the toilet, but, a lot of time I'll go there. And it was more fun for me to just read these books, and the rules didn't really matter because I knew I was never going to have time to play them all. So obviously if I was going to play them, the rules would matter, but what really mattered to me was the story they were telling and the setting they were setting up, and all the characters and creatures and the way things worked and stuff. So that's why personally, whenever I do my writing or my illustration or game design, it's all about the theme first, and then I make mechanics that fit the story. And I think that's really what hooks me into a game, is when there's a narrative that it follows and you feel like you're part of that story.
That's something I've noticed a lot when it comes to reading online game reviews or things like that. The reviews that I read, if it starts off with, this is a deck building game of such, I stop reading because I don't care anymore. All you're doing is telling me about the mechanics. If you say, you're Darth Vader trying to stop the Rebel Alliance from doing this, I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. Or you're a sentient Twinkie in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. That sounds cool to me. Saying, this is a whimsical Savage Worlds setting that's not going to pique my interest.
Right.
So theme is important, especially for that initial contact, but does the theme really make the game fun in of itself? Or do you have to have the mechanics to back up the theme? Can you have a weak theme and strong mechanics and still have a fun game? Or can you have a really strong theme and weak mechanics and still come up with a fun game? Or is there some other X factor out there?
Personally, I feel, at least historically, it's easier to have a game that has good mechanics and a weak theme and still have it be fun to play. Like, look at every card game ever that uses just a deck of cards and not like Magic the Gathering kind of card game, but, one that just uses an normal
Poker, Pinochle, and...
Yeah, all those don't have
Bridge.
a theme. I mean, if they do, it's a very weak theme. And people, take those games and, they take Mafia and make it into Are You a Werewolf? And then it becomes more popular, but the games work fine when you're just using cards.
And then you refine the theme even further, and you get games like Resistance.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a lot easier if you have you have to have a good mechanic in order for a game to be fun. But if you have a great theme and a good mechanic, then you got something special.
Do you have anything to add on that, John, in terms of weak mechanic versus weak theme or which one's more important to have strong?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Andy where, the best games are the ones that merge the best of both worlds, where they strike a balance of having the theme enhance the mechanics. I'm trying to think of actually a single example that a game has almost no mechanics and it's just all about the theme. And, I mean, maybe, like, the closest thing I can come to is Dixit, where it's not necessarily the theme, it's... I mean, now we're kind of getting into territory where you're not so much playing a game as you're creating an experience. Have you guys played Dixit?
I haven't.
I have. The way it works is each player gets a hand of cards that have some sort of picture on them, like a drawing painting. And one player lays down a card face down and says some phrase to try to make the other players able to guess it without being so specific that everyone guesses correctly. And then everyone else plays a picture from their hand face down. And then everyone votes on which one they think is the right one. And if no one votes for your card, you don't get any points. If everyone votes for your card, you don't get any points. But if some people vote for your card and some people vote for the other cards, you get points, and the people who played those cards get points. There's actually a tabletop episode with Will Wheaton where they play this. And it's a really, really fun game. But like John was saying, I've explained to you the entire rules of the game, except for the fact that there's little bunny meeples that you move along a point track. And it's the first to 30 wins.
Yeah, and see, we even stopped even bothering scoring because it was more fun just creating, having that shared experience. It basically is kind of this creative experience because you're putting cards out and kind of telling a story or telling your interpretation of a story in a very abstract, kind of cool, weird way. But we even got to the point where the scoring system just got in the way of that. And we're like, we're just having more fun just playing the game, and it doesn't even matter who wins.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of games like that nowadays. There's, games like Apples to Apples or
Cards Against Humanity.
Exactly, or even like Telestrations or something like that. They don't have much of a mechanic. Their mechanic is pretty much get everyone together and make them laugh. It's not so much... I've never kept score with any of those games, any three of those.
Even back when I was a kid and we had Trivial Pursuit, I don't think I've ever actually played the game Trivial Pursuit. We just all sat around in a circle asking each other trivia questions.
Right. So, I think there are some themes, and I use that term loosely because it could mean just like a skin, like, just the art style. There are some themes that do wear thin, like, Munchkin is an example where once the jokes run out, you can only tell that joke once and it's funny. And eventually the jokes run out, the game runs out. I think we're actually, we're kind of getting into an age where people's tastes in games have evolved to the point where if it's an interesting and engaging enough experience, people don't really care so much about the game or even if they win or lose. If the experience is interesting enough and engaging enough, people are interested in just sharing that experience rather than getting really into mechanics and strategies and even who wins or loses or getting points.
You can see that same sort of shift happening in the role-playing game industry as well with games like Fate, which is no matter what, you roll 4 dice and you add up the pluses and minuses. And that's pretty much it for the rules for Fate. So you get to the same thing where they're stripping out a lot of the mechanics to focus on the theme. So you get, here's the rule system. Now here's Dresden Files.
Yeah, I remember the first time my friend introduced me to role-playing games, and he described it as, well, this is a game where nobody wins or loses. And my first reaction was, well, what's the point? And it blew my mind. I was like, well, why do you even bother playing a game like that? But I think that, that philosophy of, the mechanics, the winning or losing isn't as important as sharing an experience. And sometimes actually worrying about who's going to win or lose only gets in the way. I think that philosophy is starting to carry over, into the board games. When I trace the line back to the origins of that, I think that the earliest examples I can think of are role-playing games. I think as gamers kind of evolve and their tastes evolve, that's kind of more higher level too. I know when people usually first get into games, the focus is all about winning. They want to prove themselves. They want that aspect of a challenge, because it's a test to see how well they do, is how close they get to winning.
That's true. Well, these cooperative games, you still win or lose those games. You just don't win or lose against the other players. A lot of my friends and my kids really like the cooperative games. I do too, because you either win or lose as a group, and I think that's a relatively new concept. I think in games, I don't remember any games when I was a kid that you played like that.
And there are games that I play that for me, it doesn't matter. I'm definitely trying to win the game, especially those cooperative games. I'm definitely trying to win, but the experience isn't about winning or losing. Going back to Pandemic, I've got a 50-50 win record, and most of that comes from me misunderstanding one of the rules that really made it a lot easier for me to win. We didn't know you had to build research stations by playing cards in the cities you were in. So we were building research stations left and right.
Oh.
So if we factor that out, I'm probably at about a 20% win rate on that game. But I still love it. It is so much fun to play even when the game's kicking my ass. I don't know if it has to do with the mechanics or the theme or the tone, but I just know I get so into the game that sometimes whenever we get down to those last few cards and we know there's still one epidemic card left, my hand will shake as I'm reaching to draw my card for the turn.
I think that's a good example of a game that combines all of those things. It has a great mechanic and a great look to it. It's got a great theme, and it's a theme that people are familiar with. Everyone knows about diseases and all that, so it's got a good hook. Plus, it got a lot of people who love it that kind of talk about it a lot, so, that helps. But, yeah, that's a great game. I love Pandemic.
There's another game that kind of swings the other way and kind of leads into my next question, which is another cooperative game. It's called Castle Panic. Have either of you guys played that one?
I have not.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, if you haven't, it's a tower defense game where you and the other players are defenders inside this castle with its wall. And there's a massive horde of orcs, trolls, and goblins coming from the forest trying to advance on you. And the mechanics are really, really simple. Again, this is another game that's been on tabletop with Will Wheaton. If you watch that episode, the mechanics are so simple, you don't even have to watch the extended edition hour and a half one they have. You can watch the 20-minute version, and you've learned 95% of the rules to the game by the time you've gotten to the end of it. It's really, really simple and really easy to learn. And it's got that same challenge where you're trying to figure out the best way to use what resources you have to quarantine and defeat this enemy that's trying to attack you, which is kind of the same, I don't want to say theme because it's not the same theme in terms of that word, but it's kind of the same vibe that Pandemic has, in that you're trying to prevent something from happening by working together, but the tone of the two is completely different. Pandemic, it's really kind of pretty serious and very clear-cut. We're CDC, we're doing to do this, this, and this, and this. And in Castle Panic, it's not that serious. It's a little bit lighter in tone. So how does tone factor into how enjoyable a game is, how much fun you have playing it?
Well, I think, both Pandemic and Castle Panic are really good games. I have a lot of fun playing both. But I think where Castle Panic succeeds more than Pandemic is rather prone to the loudest player syndrome, where you have the alpha gamer or the person who's just the best at doing math. Basically, he takes the lead and he just orders everybody else and tells them what to do. And when you have a perfect information game, one of the major problems that plagues a lot of cooperative games is you can have one person just take over the game and just order everybody else. This is the best thing that you can possibly do, with your resources. With Castle Panic, you're all working together, but you don't really have that problem. It does feel like, you're kind of in command of your own hand of cards, and you can do what you want. And it does strike a good balance of coordinating with other people to optimize the best moves. But, Castle Panic is one that I haven't seen, people taking over and playing the game for you.
I actually have seen that a lot. I've actually done that
a couple
of times.
Okay.
I try not to, but in some cases it's just, okay, if you do this, 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 and this, and this, then this will happen. What do you guys think? And that's my way of kind of alleviating that alpha gamer thing, where the one person takes over. It's like, okay, this is my opinion on what we should do. Throwing it on the table, discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had that experience a lot with Pandemic too. Where it's basically one person playing the game and then everyone else is just kind of being that person's minions or something. It's still fun, but it's, I didn't really think about that, but John's completely right. That does happen.
Well, in regards to tone, I think with Pandemic is because it's so serious. You really do feel like, okay, we got to beat this game. People's lives are at stake, The fate of the world is in our hands. And I think the tone kind of implies, you have a much greater sense of urgency, and, the stress level makes it where the alpha gamer takes over and he's like, no, you have to do the best move possible or we're all going to die. Whether Castle Panic, you still ultimately have the same outcome. If the invaders take over the castle, we're all dead. But it has a much more lighter tone. And so I think that also kind of helps minimize the alpha gamer, because you just don't really take the game that seriously, and it's more about the fun.
One question I have is, what do you think it is that makes Castle Panic lighter in tone than Pandemic when you think about it? Because it's both, like I said, the same thing. Invaders coming in one case it's germs, in the other case it's evil monsters. And these monsters are going to smash down our walls and Conan our entire village. So is it all in the presentation? This is something that might key to both of you guys, because both of you are artists as well. Could it be the fact that the art in Castle Panic seems to be a little bit more cartoony and simplified and more fun compared to Pandemic, which goes for this more realistic style art?
I think that does make a difference for sure. I'm not familiar with Castle Panic, so I can't really speak specifically about that. But, my setting is pretty much defined by the art. Personally, that's the first thing you see when you flip through a book. Any book.
That's what you got nominated for an Emmy for, wasn't it?
Yes, sir. Thank you. 2 of them, actually. Woohoo! But
you got robbed. Yeah. You got robbed, by the way.
No, come on. I didn't even see the product that won, but I'm sure it was worthy of it.
I did. It was worthy, but not as worthy.
Well, thank you for saying that. But I was happy just to be in everyone's company. But anyway, you know, any game you look at, the first thing you're going to see is the box or the cover. And the art that's on that box or cover is what's going to set the tone for the entire game. If you took Pandemic and made the exact same game that it is, except changed the art to cartoon characters, people would have a completely different gaming experience with it, I think. It would be, you know, more laughing, and it wouldn't be so serious. You wouldn't be worried so much about everyone dying because they're just goofy cartoon characters. Who cares if they die? Or if Castle Panic was set up with, you know, ultra gritty, realistic art that looked like Vietnam War or something, it probably would have a completely different tone too, even though the mechanic could be identical.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm probably saying things that are pretty obvious to everybody, but, you know, I want to have something to say. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that any game, you could completely change the game or the way people experience the game just by changing the art. It doesn't matter what the mechanic is in that respect.
John, did you have anything on that in terms of how art interacts with tone or tone in general?
Actually, I think Andy just did a great job summarizing that. But, you know, I think one of the cool things that art does is it allows you to, you know, kind of step away from just the game aspect of it. For example, like in Castle Panic, you know, let's say the orcs have been just storming the castle, wreaking a lot of havoc. You can have a grudge. Like, I just hate orcs. Like, or, you know, like, because there's warlocks, there's ogres, there's orcs and stuff. Like, you can have a grudge with a specific character in that game. And anytime that token pops up, you can say, you know, you killed my mother, you killed my father, I am going to kill you, you know, and I don't care if it's not the best move in the game. I have a grudge against you, and I'm going to take this token out of principle. And so you can have, you know, really interesting dynamics like that are just based off of psychology, not necessarily pure strategy mechanics. Art has the power to kind of pull you away from just the core mechanics, you know, just the dry, bare bones game engine that's going on, and, you know, kind of transcend that into you know, an experience where it evokes emotion and it evokes reactions that just pure mechanics won't.
That's why illustrators in the role-playing game industry are so highly paid. I mean, we can make literally dozens of dollars a year doing this kind of job. And we're worth it. I mean, we really do set the tone for these games. I mean, think about a game like... Let me think of one.
I actually have one. There's a board game called Zombies! ! It's your survivors in a zombie apocalypse trying to fight off the zombies to accomplish a goal. Then there's another game called Last Night on Earth, which is you're in a zombie apocalypse and you're playing the survivors trying to accomplish a goal.
Yep.
The two games have completely different feels from what I haven't actually gotten to play Zombies, but I've watched my friends play a game. They started it while I was outside smoking a cigarette and secreting some bourbon into my coffee cup. So I didn't get to play that game, but I watched them play it, and it was a really serious, because they used in the game art. It was artistic drawings that were, I don't want to say realistic, because the competitor used something that's even more realistic, but it was very emotionally realistic. It was, the zombies that they had on the artwork were really terrifying zombies, like shambling corpses with blood dripping from their jaws. Meanwhile, Last Night on Earth, everything is photographs. And it's photographs with the lighting and framing of, like, cheesy B-movie zombies. It would be like comparing something like Night of the Living Dead to Return of the Living Dead, which one is very serious in tone, even if it does get cheesy because of the melodramatic aspects, but it's still a really strong story with really strong commentary because it's shot that way, versus brains. And Return of the Living Dead has a completely different feel to it because of the way it's shot. And I think those two games have completely different feels because of the way that the art makes you think. If you're looking at a picture of someone who's holding their arm because they've got a bite mark on it and they're grimacing in pain, and it's like really evocative artwork, that puts you in a different mindset compared to a card of Johnny Quarterback holding a baseball bat in his leather jacket, and it's an actual photograph.
Absolutely. You know, a game I can think of that really the art makes an incredible difference is what we talked about earlier, Munchkin. I mean, if you replace the art in Munchkin with, say, the art from first edition D&D or second edition D&D, like realistic, not really realistic, but not.
Are you talking about the cover illustrations
No,
or
they're
the
not the
monster
cards
manual
themselves.
illustrations?
No. Well, any of them really. I just mean the realism. I'm not saying that the illustrations were lifelike, but I mean they were trying to depict actual living creatures rather than cartoonish versions of them. And if you take Munchkin cards and any D&D really, and replace the art that's in the Munchkin cards with more realistic art, the game would be entirely different, and it would probably be really boring. Because the thing about the game is the giggles, and those come from the art and the writing that's on the cards. But I think if you had that same writing on those same cards with different art that wasn't funny, it would not be the same game at all.
Because we actually had John Goodenough on our last podcast, and he kind of touched on the art a little bit in that one, but we didn't go into much detail on it. But I completely understand what you're saying. That sort of humorous, lighthearted, cartoony style added to the humor and whimsical nature to it, and the punny titles kind of helped that as well, too.
That's true. Yeah, but you put the punny titles with realistic-looking art, and it would just be a clash. They would, it'd confuse people.
Probably would, because it'd be kind of grating against one another. Two different tones trying to come together in one.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of games that have suffered from that, in my opinion. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but I can't think of any because I don't play them.
Right.
Oh, I can think of one. They didn't call it, but it was the 3rd edition of Cyberpunk, the role-playing game from R. Tolsarian. I can never say their company name. But it's the Cyberpunk role-playing, Cyberpunk 2020. They came out with a 3rd edition of the game that all the artwork was basically Cyberpunk dressed-up Barbie dolls photographed. That giggling is the exact reaction you should have, because it looked that bad.
But was it meant to be funny?
No, because the tone of the Cyberpunk game, especially if you compare it to the other big Cyberpunk role-playing game, Shadowrun, Shadowrun has this whole vibe of you have power to affect change, even if it's small change in the world. You may be a magician, you may be a big powerful troll. In Cyberpunk, you're human people. And you can't just cram yourself full of cyberware, because then you'll go psychotic and turn NPC. So you can't just turn yourself into this big, huge battle tank, although almost everyone did. But the tone in that game was trying to go for that sort of neuromancer feel of being very, very serious, while Shadowrun was trying to go for more of a Snow Crash feel, which is a little bit more, pushes it over the top just enough that it starts becoming humorous and a little bit more lighthearted, even though the stories in Shadowrun still got very serious and dark in some places.
Yeah.
But you had that tone in Cyberpunk where it was very dystopian, very normal, very corporations rule everything, and you have nothing, you are a cog in the machine. And here's a picture of your cog in the machine, Barbie doll with a mohawk.
Wow, that's crazy. I'd like to see that book, actually.
It's getting hard to find because they had, I think, 2 print runs.
Yeah.
And that was it. And this was back in the day when it was normal to go to like 18 or 19 print runs before an edition crapped out.
But you were talking about tone before, and I think especially when you're talking about role-playing games, if I may interject this little nugget of wisdom, or may not be wisdom, I'm not sure. We'll decide that after I'm done talking. It seems like so much of tone is based on the game master and the players. I mean, I've played games like D&D games and stuff at cons, or even like Call of Cthulhu, stuff that's supposed to be really grim, and it just turns into like a giggle fest with everybody, not being able to stop chuckling just because the players and the game master are making it that way, So I think you can take even a game that's dark and grim and still make it hilarious, or you could take a silly game and make it serious, but I don't know why you'd want to do that.
I don't know, I could really run a very, very serious Low Life campaign, probably.
You could. Yeah, I don't know why you'd want to. I mean, you could, but
just to prove it's possible and for the thought experiment of it. But that also comes from the depth of Low Life too. There's a lot going on there that you could tell a serious story to it. Paranoia had, and I think it's the XP edition that they did, where they had 3 different tones to the game. One was Zap, which is traitor, commie, mutant, zap, zap, zap. Everyone's killing each other all the time, constantly.
Yeah.
Then there was a middle road where it was you had to actually back up your claims when you killed another person, but it was highly encouraged. Then there was a third one that nobody liked, I should say. But there was a third version that was meant to be a dark and serious take on what it would be like to have a chaotic AI running a society underground in this bunker, and it really wanted to explore those emotions, and it didn't work at all, even though with the concept that they had, it could have worked. So I'm kind of wondering why it didn't. Another one that comes to mind is World of Darkness. World of Darkness, if you read the books, they're really trying to push you toward this sort of dark, brooding Interview with the Vampire Lestat style mentality for your characters, where you're wanting to really explore the darkness of the monster within. And I have never played in a World of Darkness game where it wasn't Blade or Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, I haven't either. I had those, but like I played. The only time I've ever played live action vampire was a long time ago. But I made a character named Chocolate Milk, and yeah, and it was crazy, but it was fun and it was goofy. Like, I'm just a goofy person. I can't help it. So I think I was pissing everybody else off. I don't think I was being obnoxious, but I wasn't. I was trying to be like a real person. You know, I wasn't one of those guys with like a fake British accent standing there with his arms crossed in the corner like everyone else was. So I think people resented me for that, so they sucked out my brain with their tongues. But it grew back. But I want to give John a chance to talk too, but I wanted to just jump back real quick to what you were talking a little bit ago about tone and Low Life. And I know I don't want to just talk about Low Life because that's my thing, and of course I want to promote it. Everyone go check out Low Life at motherwavecreations.com. But I think the thing that makes Low Life work is that it is an incredibly silly setting. I mean, you have sentient snack cakes and, you know, things like that in it. And, you know, characters evolve from cockroaches and worms and things like that. But what makes it work is it is utterly ridiculous, but the characters themselves don't realize that they are ridiculous. To them, it's completely normal, and that's how the world should be. So I think if you take that attitude when you're playing the game, and I think that comes across in the writing, it really is a very playable game, and it's a lot of fun, and it's not nearly as goofy and silly, and it's not just toilet humor like a lot of people thought at first when they first heard about it, because yes, you can play sentient mounds of poop, but there's more to them than that, and quite a bit more if you investigate. So I just thought I'd take the opportunity to jump in and say that. But I'd like to give John a chance to say something wise, because he's a pretty wise guy.
Well, I think, I don't know, I think we've kind of covered this pretty well. I guess the one thing I would add is you can have mechanics and theme try to imply the tone. No matter how hard you try, I mean, ultimately the tone of the game experience is going to be made by the players. And if they don't want to take a game seriously, it doesn't matter how serious you try to make the mechanics and the theme and the art and the story. You know, ultimately the players are going to play the game that they want to. As far as the theme, I think the major job that the theme does is it tries to steer players towards getting into that tone, towards triggering the type of emotions that you're looking for. You know, the only side note on that is, and that's probably, in my experience, has been the hardest to do in game design. Role-playing games, it might be a little easier because you're having players kind of create their own stories, but like with board games, you know, creating psychological experiences, creating emotions, because you're mostly working with raw mechanics. You know, it's probably one of the hardest parts of the job is trying to evoke emotion and drive home the tone.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you so far, but I need another round. I'm going to head up to the bar and get us some drinks, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Hello, random stranger who's totally not just me using a different voice.
Well, hello, incredibly handsome stranger.
Hey, have you heard about the new Dementalism Kickstarter? It's totally awesome. It's this really great game, and I know you're going to love it.
Really, tell me more.
Well, see, you play these guys who work for the Primordial Soup Kitchen, and a whole bunch of clones have escaped because of something you did, because you really suck at your job, and you have to go out and collect them before you get fired or fed to something horrible. It's super, super fun, I promise.
Oh yeah? How do I find it?
Oh, it's very, very simple. Just go to www.dementalism.com.
Really? It's that easy?
Yeah, and it's brought to you by Mother Oath Creations, the good people who brought you Low Life and other really awesome stuff.
Dude, you totally have to check that out.
In a world of perilous adventure, the forces of evil have triumphed. Those who remain uncorrupted by wickedness must rely upon monsters to fight against the darkness. Hi, I'm Ross Watson, and I'm talking about my new setting for the Savage Worlds RPG called Accursed. Accursed is a dark fantasy setting where classic monsters team up to fight witches, where the heroes must choose whether to embrace the curse that gives them monstrous power, or reject it and try to regain their lost humanity. Check us out at AccursedRPG.com or search for Accursed RPG on Kickstarter. Our campaign runs through October 13th, and we need your support to help make this world come to life.
And we are now back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Ross Watson has shown back up again.
Hello. I was off fighting a grue. It was a long and bloody battle, and I don't think there was any victor except to say that I survived. But I have returned. Well, I first want to say a very honored hello to Mr. Andy Hopp and Mr. John Goodenough, who are both luminaries in the gaming industry. Both have designed games, and Andy, like myself, is a fellow Kickstarter, who with a very successful Kickstarter as well. So it's a pleasure to have you both on the show. Thank you guys for coming.
It's great being here.
During the break, we were talking about Comic Palooza, where Andy and I met, and that was my first experience playing the Star Wars miniature game. And I was so fucking hungover when I played that game, but I still had a blast playing it. It was so much fun to sit there and pilot I think I played Empire, so I was in the TIE Fighters trying to fight off the X-Wings. So it was still a blast, even when I felt like complete and utter shit.
John and I actually worked together for 3 years at Fantasy Flight, and I was a playtester on X-Wing. John, were you a playtester on X-Wing too?
Yeah, during the early development. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it captured a lot of that feel of miniature wargaming that I never played Warhammer, but I did play a lot of BattleTech growing up. And it captured a lot of that feel of it, but it seemed to streamline things, and it felt more fun than I remember having playing even BattleTech or any of the other games that I've loved. So that brings us back to our topic. What makes a game fun? What was it about the X-Wing miniature game that made it so much fun, even though I felt like I wanted to put a bullet in my fucking skull?
Wow.
Oh, it was because I drank all the bourbon and vodka in Houston, I think.
Well, sometime we're going to have to get Jay Little to actually come on and talk about X-Wing, because I'm sure he could tell us exactly what he was thinking. But, that's a good question, though. What makes, in terms of X-Wing, as an example, is probably the game balance. That, you can play as the X-Wing, you can play as the TIE Fighters, and neither side feels like they're totally boned right from the start. Would X-Wing still be fun if it wasn't X-Wing, if it was something else?
And the X-Wing was kind of adjusted from a game called... Oh, I'm sorry, I've already forgot the name again, and you guys just mentioned it.
Wings of War. Well, I wouldn't say Wings of War was... I would say X-Wing is a different game than Wings of War.
Inspired by.
Inspired by is a better way to put it, yeah.
Because I played both games, and I will have to admit, the theme did have a huge appeal to me. Like, I couldn't stop making sound effects and, little pew-pew noises.
Me too.
And, I got, nostalgia, I don't think people should ever underestimate the power of nostalgia, because playing with Star Wars action figures, and I had the X-Wing and a TIE Fighter, and what could be more glorious than actually having rules? And so you can actually play a real game, reliving those type of moments from your childhood. So
Preach on, Brother John.
Yeah. Well, I will have to admit, I'll be totally honest, nostalgia and the theme totally sucked me in, and a large part of my enjoyment was because of that. But in addition to that, it's a solid game. Like Ross was saying, the balance, I think, is a big factor. I think one of the other appeals on the game side is it actually does feel, you're doing dogfights and you're moving through space, but it it simulates that really well. I mean, you do kind of give the impression that you're doing these tricky maneuvers, and you create, you know, moments where you do a move that's unexpected, and so you can kind of outgun and outpilot your opponent.
Yeah, I would say that depth is another reason why it's a good game. There's a good amount of tactical depth. There's sort of a sweet spot when you design games like this, and I believe that John will back me up on this, that you're looking for, and that's called easy to learn but hard to master.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of games like that. In fact, if I may once again pimp my Dementalism card game that we've been talking about, and I know that's lame to do that, but it fits this theme because I've been getting that a lot from people that, you know, it takes like a minute to learn how to play the game, but to master the game.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty much, it's very reminiscent of the old game, like Memory.
It is, but there are a lot of ways to cheat in it, basically. It is a matching game where you're flipping cards over trying to make matches, but there are 3 of each card instead of 2, and there are also wild cards, and there are turmoil cards, which are just random effects that happen, and there's some new cards introduced in the new expansions that are coming out. But the idea is, it is a memory-based game, but you don't actually have to have a good memory to play it, because there are a lot of ways to peek at the cards and to make people reveal the cards that they have, and you can steal cards from other people.
That sounds pretty cool.
Thank you. Say John has like a Denizen card and a Giggity, which are the wild cards, and he's got it in his store, which is the area in front of him, and then Darryl flips a card that matches the one that he has in his store. If Darryl knows which one it is, he can steal it from John, discard the wild card, then he has 2 of the same Denizen. Then say Ross comes along and flips the 3rd one, he can then steal it from Darryl, and he gets 3 of the same one, and then that one can never be stolen again, and he gets access to a special power that's listed at the bottom of the card. So it is a memory-based game, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah.
And the reason I brought it up was that it's one of those games that the mechanic of the game is very, very simple. You just flip cards over and try to make matches. But there's a lot of strategies involved that kind of become evident as you play.
Yeah, depth. That's what we're talking about. Is like, you know, it's got some depth to it. You're not just playing Go Fish, right? I mean, there's a lot of different strategies. There's a lot of different approaches.
And it's also a trend that's been going on in board games recently, where it's, let's take this mechanic and then build on what's already there, because you come from something as simple as Werewolf, and then you get into the Resistance and Bloodbound, like I was talking about earlier, or you have something like a load and haul game like Galaxy Trucker, and then you reskin it to fit the theme of Firefly, and you have the Firefly board game that just came out at Gen Con.
Oh, does Firefly have exposed connectors?
No, it has a lot of Goram and Chinese cursing.
Well, I'm gonna miss that from Galaxy Trucker, but
but it does have characters that you can hire on as your crew, and they have loyalty that they can become disloyal, and you can steal crew members away, and each crew member has a special power.
Well, we did a lot of discussion about game balance as it applies to board games and card games now and miniature games, and I think that for all 3 of those types of games, game balance is, I would say it's critical to those particular types of games, because those games are all about the mechanics that are supporting the theme, in my opinion. Now, John, do you agree or disagree with that?
I do. I think I have a bit of a counterpoint. I guess the biggest word of advice I would give is focus on balance depends on the type of game, the context of the game. I mean, I've seen games where you could easily balance the fun right out of it. By making everything mathematically equal to everything, it just sucks the fun right out.
That was a big complaint of 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons from a lot of people, especially 3rd edition players, was that 4th edition kind of sucked the fun out because everything was so balanced. But for some people, that was also a selling point to it. They loved that all the classes were balanced against each other. You didn't have the wizard or the cleric so overpowered at later levels compared to the fighter or the thief.
Yeah, and I think ultimately the players, what they really want, when they say, oh, I want my games to be balanced. I mean, really what they want is the illusion of balance. They want the impression that the game is balanced. But what they want even more than perfect balance, is, perfect mathematical balance, is they want moments in the game where there are swingy interactions, where, you chop an orc's head off with one, swipe of your sword, because that's what creates drama. That's what creates these spikes in excitement. if a game is too balanced, what happens is you just have, if you plotted it out on a chart, you just have this perfectly straight line. Fun games they look more like a roller coaster where you have ups and downs. You have lulls, you have kind of low moments, and then you have spikes where there's a lot of action, there's a lot of things happening, and then it's a rise and fall. The more quote unquote fun games are the ones that have those rises and falls, as opposed to a more flatline, slow, steady progression.
That's a very good point. It's just like any story you're telling, whether it's a game or a book or a movie. You've got to have the peaks and valleys. If it's just a constant battle with your characters dominating, destroying everything, it's not fun for anyone.
Right. So kind of the trick in balance is, it's not to have the balance be a flat line. It's to have as many peaks as there are valleys, and that's what creates the overall impression of balance. Where just as many setbacks as you have, you can have triumphs and really awesome moments to shine. That's a really great
way of putting it, John. Now, actually,
he's like Yoda.
Yeah, there was a recent thing. Penny Arcade has this thing on their site called Extra Credits, and they did a thing a while back that I thought was really cool. They did a thing on a concept called perfect imbalance, and it's a concept that basically is like rock paper scissors. Is a perfectly balanced game, but it's perfectly imbalanced in that one guy can always beat another guy who can always beat the third guy. And the example they gave was actually League of Legends, where basically which is a video game for people who don't know what it is. Whoever may be living under a rock and doesn't know what it is.
Me.
Guilty,
yeah, I understand. So League of Legends, they have basically they'll come out with 1 week, and a particular type of character will be superior to, basically you'll have a rock week where rock characters are better than paper. Better than scissors. And then the next week they'll release an improvement for paper that will then, make paper more attractive. And then the next week after that they'll make a release for scissors, which will make scissors more attractive. And it kind of turns it into a cyclical process where people are always looking forward to the next update of the rules of the game, because they will get a chance to to basically iterate on their play. And you can actually look at that, at least I think Darryl might agree with me here, you can look at that as a allegory to a lot of the role-playing markets, where like different splat books will come out and re-emphasize a certain type of play over another.
You see that a lot when Shadowrun editions first start up. That's something we're going to see very soon in 5th edition of Shadowrun, which is they're going to launch a splat book for, say, Street Samurai, which is all the new cyberware for Street Sam characters. And all of a sudden the balance is going to shift, so they're more critical. Then we're going to get the magical book, and then the magical book is going to level out the magical characters to the Street Samurai. But you still got all the other characters, deckers and faces and whatnot, still below that, because they only have the core rule books. And as they release more splat books, everyone gets leveled out, except where the levels aren't exactly balanced. And by that time, you're like 2 years into the edition cycle, and they come out with another book and another book and another book and another book that has little bits and pieces for every single different, I don't want to say class, because Shadowrun isn't a class-based system, it's a role-based system, though.
An archetype-based system.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think this basically boils down to the question where we were asking, which is, does a game have to be balanced to be fun? And I would say that answer is no.
And that really comes to the point with a game we talked about earlier, Munchkin. One of the biggest complaints that's against it is that it is so swingy in terms of its balance. There are a lot of classes, a lot of races, a lot of cards, flat out, that just are not balanced. And if you get one of these cards, you are suddenly in a huge position to win.
It seems to me like it depends also on what kind of game you're playing.
Yes.
It's definitely more important to be balanced in a competitive game. Like, look at an old school game like Monopoly or something like that.
Oh.
Once one person, I hate Monopoly, but once one person starts winning,
talk about unbalanced.
It's 5 hours of attrition, and it sucks. It's not fun for anybody except the person who's winning, who really is only happy because it's stroking their ego, not because they're actually having fun with the game.
So I think what you're saying is the answer is really it depends.
Well, that's pretty much the answer to every question ever asked ever. But yeah, I would say though in a situation like a role-playing game or a competitive board game, or I mean a cooperative board game, balance isn't quite as important. Especially in a role-playing game, I personally feel it's more important that your personal character is the character you enjoy playing, and it doesn't really matter if another character is more powerful or less powerful, as long as everyone is playing their role. And if they're balanced as far as they get equal time in the narrative, as opposed to balanced in who chops off the most heads, I think it's just as much fun for everyone. In fact, sometimes it's more fun to play the weak character.
Well, so, I think a lot of people kind of look at balance they look at balance as like a mathematical. It's always math, right? And they look at fun as something that is more intuitive. And it's not necessarily those two are completely separate things. There's kind of like a Venn diagram where those two overlap in terms of game design, and there's ways to make a game balanced to be more fun, and there's ways to make it unbalanced to be more fun.
There's a card game called We Didn't Playtest This.
Mm-hmm.
It is the most unbalanced mess of a game I've ever seen in my life, and that's the entire point because it's in the title. But in an atmosphere of, I played this at a convention, and it was so much fun to play because it was so completely and utterly unbalanced, and there were weird, wacky rules that made no sense whatsoever. It actually added to the fun in that case, but that was also kind of the point of the game as well.
Cool.
Well, actually, I think you've done some head-to-head games like their World War II game, right?
Yeah, Tide of Iron was actually like notorious for being unbalanced, so that's not the best example. But I think the more a game leans towards having the reward of playing the game be competitive. In other words, the fun of the game is winning, as opposed to the fun of the game is just having an experience or telling a story. So the more competitive a game gets, I think the more balanced it needs to be.
Agreed.
Good point.
And Magic the Gathering is probably a good example of that. Now, this is off the top of my head. It just popped in my head. I started playing Magic the Gathering about the first deck I bought was hot off the presses revised edition, 3rd edition Magic. So that's how early I was in the game. So I actually said the phrase, I'm not paying $20 for a fucking time walk, and had everyone around with me agree with me on that. Which, by the way, that's a card that's currently trading for about $400 to $500. By the way, old Magic the Gathering players, never look up how much the cards you had back in the day are worth. Never do that.
Yeah, it will just make you cry. But don't forget, you can always bring your cards to Gen Con and trade them for a sword.
On a semi-related note, I had a visitor from the far future come to my house yesterday, and he told me that all of the Dementalism cards are actually selling for $40,000 and up in about 8 years from now.
Are
So
people
I just thought
like
I'd throw that out.
Are people
let you
like
guys know
framing
that.
them? Are people framing them on the wall?
Oh yeah, they're like laminating them, and they're putting them in like vacuum sealed glass chambers and stuff. You know how it is. Also, I'd like to point out that John looks a lot like Matt Damon in his picture that I'm looking at right now.
Oh, well, I'm actually going to consider that a compliment. I think
it is. I look like Dilbert's boss mixed with the Violator from Spawn. So
well, actually, the person I heard most referred to is I've heard Richie Cunningham from Happy Days or Ron Howard or whatever.
Oh yeah, I could see that. But
No,
so
Matt
you're
Damon's
like the
better.
bastard offspring of Richie Cunningham and Matt Damon. And I'm like, Danny DeVito and Violator from Spawn. So,
Yeah, but the cool Violator.
you got the good genes there.
But back to my point with Magic the Gathering was, back in the old days, you had cards that were so unbalanced. You had, every single color had a 1 cost gets you 3 card. The first one that was pulled out of the set was Ancestral Recall, which was 1 blue, draw 3 cards. Instant. And that so unbalanced the game, they pulled it out even back in the day. And then it got to the point where all of those cards are now no longer in the game. because they were so unbalanced. Because at the start, they were trying to build a game for people to play casually. It eventually evolved this entire tournament mentality to the point where current sets are completely and utterly different in the way they handle rules, and there are no overpowered cards, and the underpowered cards have combos that make them on level with the other cards. And it's something that evolved with the game, and that they moved from a casual play to a tournament play. So is that something that might make a difference, is the tournament versus casual play?
Yeah, it's like John said. I think if it's a really competitive game, the more competitive it is, and tournaments are obviously the most competitive version, then the more imbalance is important to be a fun game. Because the fun is in the winning. Isn't that what you said, John?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty much sums it up. Yeah.
I guess this is kind of metaphysical, but if the fun is only in the winning, can you really consider it a game anymore?
It's a competition.
I don't know. To me,
ask a Warhammer player.
It's a sport, I guess.
Basically, I was thinking about this earlier, is that, Magic is... We were talking about how, we were sort of telling stories with games. Like, I know that in Dementalism, you can sort of tell a story, and in Tide of Iron, you can tell a story. In the games I've designed, you can tell a story. And those are sort of about the experience more than about winning. But if you're going to play Magic the Gathering, if you're like a hardcore 40K player, in the miniature circuit, it's not so much about telling that story. It's really about coming away with that trophy and going home and saying I competed against the best and I won. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different type of fun.
Yeah.
And it may be why I don't play Magic anymore. Is when I started playing, it was more about the telling a story and having fun playing a game, as opposed to I must win.
Yeah, I remember back in the day at Gen Con, 15 years ago or so, playing in the RPGA tournaments for D&D. That was 2nd edition D&D. And those were just based on, did you make it through this room? Did you kill this monster? Did you get past this trap? And they really discouraged role-playing and stuff, and it was miserable. I hated it. But at the same time, you got to win a trophy if you did it well. It didn't encourage any of the things that I personally play role-playing games for, which is to immerse yourself in the narrative and the characters and be part of the story. And this was more like a video game or something. Yeah,
Andy, that actually reminds me of, I tried the Shadowrun Missions, which is sort of the Shadowrun version of the RPGA. When I sat down to play, the GM said, okay, we need to get through this adventure tonight in 4 hours, and that means there isn't any role-playing tonight, okay? You just tell me what you do and roll your dice, and then we'll move on.
Oh, screw that.
And I said, I have to go, guys. I'll be down in the bar.
Yeah, that's not a role-playing game anymore.
Oh, yeah. Shadowrun is so much story-based. How can you do that?
When it becomes a competition, I think people... Again, it's just a different type of fun. I'm not saying it's bad, wrong, or anything like that, but people put themselves in a different mindset. They go for what they need to do to win. I've played miniature games competitively, and I've felt that enjoyment. I've felt that excitement from competing against the best and seeing just how good I can be as a tactician. There is a draw to it, and it can be a lot of fun. But it's not what I'm looking for, like Andy said, it's not what I'm looking for in a role-playing game. So I avoid that particular type for me.
And that's not to pejorate the people who are looking for that in a role-playing game.
No, that's just, if they love it, good for them. I'm just saying, it didn't work for me, that's all.
Yeah, I think it can be different depending on the type of game, but I've also noticed a difference in age level too. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm becoming kind of an old man now. So one of the things I noticed is with kids will play a game, and the thing that appeals to them most, the thing that gives them the most reward, is the sense of discovery. Like, what happens when I push the red button? What happens when I push the green button? And so just discovering something, just doing something just to see what happens is the greatest reward. And then when they grow into, kind of young adulthood, the focus really shifts on to accomplishment, because they want to prove their worth and their value by winning. So that's why winning is so important to them, is because they want to use that as a measure of how they compare to other people. And as you get older, this is something I'm kind of realizing now, is the emphasis isn't as much about winning as having a social, a shared experience. And my reward is the passing on knowledge. Either teaching somebody a new game or exposing them to a new genre of game. The Germans have a word, I forget what it is, and I wouldn't be able to pronounce it anyway. The Germans have a word that is the feeling that you get when you mentor somebody and then you watch them succeed. And so,
Wow.
It's kind of the opposite of like, a competition, which is just head to head, proving your worth by how much you win. Eventually, I think most gamers, given enough time, they kind of outgrow that, and they eventually care more about just having more of a social aspect and actually, having other people succeed, and that's the reward.
I just gotta say this: Andy Hopp totally nailed it. John is Yoda.
I know. That's what I was thinking. I was like, I wish I would have waited till now to say that, but that's really. I mean, it sounds like we're making fun of him, but we're not. That really is profound.
I agree.
It almost made me cry.
And I was going to say there's kind of a similar mentality in Japan and China with martial arts, in that you're never considered truly an expert until you've taught a student.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, well,
I think the Klingons have a word for that too, probably, but I don't know what it is.
The Klingons have a word for everything.
Yeah. Wow. So, yeah, I don't know what to say now. I'm all like, that was profound.
I think, honestly, I don't think there's anything more we can actually say on that subject. So why don't we go to the next question? I think we just answered the heck out of that last one.
And this one actually goes back to something that I believe John was saying right before we took the break, which was involves game design and tone. Can a game designer force a tone on players, and if they can, should they? Should they be manipulating the players of the game in that way?
I would say it's possible to do so, but I would discourage it. I think it's more the game designer's job is to set up a place for everyone else to play, and people can take it from there. If you set up a game like, say, like Call of Cthulhu or something like that, and the book that you wrote has, grim artwork and gory stuff, and, all your writing is about dark subjects and dangerous things, that's obviously the starting point for it. But if you've got a bunch of goofy people playing and people who enjoy laughing and telling jokes and making light of things, they're going to do what they do regardless of where you plop them. I think that's healthy. It's a difference between a game and like a movie or a book or something. In the game, you're actually part of it, especially in a role-playing game where, you get to continue the narrative the way you want to continue it. It doesn't really, it's not forced on you like it is in a book. Like if you're reading a book, you're stuck with the words that are there, and you can interpret them, I guess, in other ways. But for the most part, they're there. Same with watching a movie or something like that. It's all a different type of storytelling. But with a role-playing game, it's completely different in that the players are the characters in the game. And if they want to be goofy and silly, even though the setting is dark, or if they want to be dark and grim in a silly setting, I don't know why they're playing the game they're playing, but if they are, I don't think it should be discouraged.
Yeah, when it comes to a tone in a game, you have to. I think Andy had a good point that you have to cater to what the players really want. Okay, let's be clear. Like in a role-playing game, which is where Andy I think was talking mostly about, tone is going to be mostly primarily in the hands of the game master, and sort of only secondarily in the setting, and maybe tertiary in the system. In a role-playing game, your setting and your system don't necessarily have to support the same tone. Like, a good example, Dungeons and Dragons is a system that can support a vast variety of different types of tones. Same thing with like Savage Worlds and things like that. With board games and card games, though, I mean, like let's look at Munchkin for an example, right? Munchkin has a very particular tone to it, and that tone is communicated to us through the art. It is communicated to us through the mechanics, and it is communicated to us through the experience of the game. I mean, it's really carried throughout the whole thing. So in Munchkin, the game design is forcing that tone, and I think it's a much better game because of that.
Then we get into a game like, and this is why I'm really glad you're here for this part of the discussion, Ross, is when we first met, it was in a Q&A in RPGNet chat room, and one of the things I kept kind of bugging you about in the Q&A you were doing was the tone of Accursed. Is it the really dark, grim, World of Darkness, brooding tone, or is it the Buffy the Vampire Slayer Blade sort of action-y tone?
And if I remember right, my answer was definitely more of the Buffy and Blade version. So yeah, I mean, and that's where the setting is informing the tone. That's where the setting is kind of telling the game master, here's where all the tools and all of the the writing that you're going to be able to support your game on, that's where they're going, and it will help you if you move in that direction. But like we were just saying, I mean, if the game master wants to run Accursed a little more, a little more zany, or a little more, hey, maybe he wants to play White Wolf with it, then he can, if he and his group want to go in that direction, they absolutely should go in that direction. My personal view of game design is that you should take the core of what your game is about, find that piece that really says this is what this game is all about, and then bridge that across the mechanics, across the artwork, across the out-of-character stuff you tell the game master and the in-character stuff you tell the players when you're describing the setting. If you can weave that thread throughout the whole bit of your game, it'll tie it together so much more strongly with the basic idea of what you're trying to get across. And I think that's really where White Wolf kind of failed in some ways, is they didn't have that thread, that thread that they built in like the out-of-character parts, where they said this is what you should be doing, didn't really carry through to the mechanics and didn't really carry through to the tone in some ways.
And that was the question I was wanting to ask when I was talking about the World of Darkness. Is White Wolf really tried to force this tone on people, where it's the brooding, I'm trying to resolve the monster within thing? Was that a good move overall? Obviously, it was a good move financially for them at the time in the 90s, but was that a good move in terms of game design and the longevity of the game?
Do you, John or Andy, you guys want to chime in on that?
Man, I don't know that shit.
Well, I would argue that, tone should not be enforced. I mean, it can be implied, but I don't think you should beat player's head, you don't beat them over the head with tone. The way I view it is the game designer's job is to build the sandbox. Your job is to build the sandbox for people to play in. Whatever, games they want to play within that world that you built is up to them, and you shouldn't penalize them, for kind stepping outside the bounds of what you imagine to be. When I made Tide of Iron, the tone that I was intending to imply was kind of a fairly serious, Saving Private Ryan type tone, where this was the greatest war ever fought, and I was trying to honor the people who fought in this great war, and I took it very seriously. But what ended up happening is the way that kind of translated, with my design style, is it. Because I work on mostly adventure games where you play the role of a hero. And so the scenarios translated into creating these heroic moments. And I designed that to create drama within the game. But what ended up happening as kind of a side effect is it shifted the tone to, instead of serious Saving Private Ryan, it's like people were doing G.I. Joe quotes and Rambo quotes, and
they're going to do that anyway.
They drew first blood, and it, and what ended up happening is it completely shifted the tone, and they weren't taking it as seriously as I intended, but they were having the time of their lives. They were having fun, and ultimately, I had to step back and be like, what? I built the sandbox. They players should have fun the way that they want to have fun.
Yeah,
and
I think if I hear what you're saying right, you're basically saying communicate, don't legislate. I'm going to share. Yeah. I'm going to share the tone with you, and try to share that experience of the tone with you. But I'm not going to force you to that tone. I'm not going to make you feel like you're doing it wrong if you're not playing by that tone. Right. And I think that's where Darryl is coming from. Is he felt like the game was telling him he was doing it wrong if he wasn't playing by that particular tone.
Mm.
Yeah, I have an interjection, if I may.
Go right ahead, sir.
Okay, well, two things. First of all, it seems to me, though, it kind of counters what we already said, but if the writer and the illustrator are doing their job properly, and the game designer, and setting the tone in the writing and the art, that they really want to convey, that's the reason people are playing the game in the first place. So if they want to take a kind of whimsical setting like Low Life and turn it into, Saving Private Ryan or something, then what are they doing playing Low Life in the first place? Or if they want to take, Tides of Iron and play it like the Three Stooges or something, then there are plenty of other games they can choose from to do that. Like, it seems to me like you shouldn't force people into it, but then again, you are setting up the tone in the writing, unless the writing doesn't really convey the tone, which happens in a lot of cases. And we talked a lot before about the art setting the tone, which I think is even more important than the art writing a lot of times, because not everybody reads all the writing.
Visuals communicate so much, especially tone. I would say tone, especially through visuals.
Yeah.
Even though that's probably the biggest thing. But that leads me into a question. I mean, that's a great answer, Andy. But it leads me into another question, and that would be, under what circumstances is it appropriate? And it's okay if the answer is none. But under what circumstances is it appropriate for a game designer to basically tell people you're doing it wrong?
When they're making a movie of it, or a TV series or something,
That's a great
but
answer.
I have fans
Can I quote
that
you on that?
will email me and say, hey, is it okay if I, make this character this particular way? Or, one guy sent me a text message saying, do you care if I, make the Gubernator of Oog with this magic spell or something? I'm like, I don't care. It's your game. I just made up these characters for you, but you do whatever you want with them. You're the one playing the game. If he's writing novels or, stuff that's canonical in some way, then I think that's where you draw the line. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter to me. If someone wants to take a character I made up and put him in a different setting, or if they want to bring characters from another setting into my world, it's their imagination. They can do what they want.
That's a great
It's
answer.
just like John said, I built the sandbox, but they're the ones with the shovels and the buckets and the little matchbox cars.
And those aren't Lincoln Logs.
And Lincoln Logs, yes.
Those are not
Tootsie
Lincoln
Rolls.
Logs in the sandbox.
No, we put a cover on when the cats are around.
But you did bring up a word that's kind of a contentious point, at least in my opinion. It's the word canonical.
Right.
When it comes to a role-playing game, what is canonical? Is it what happens at my gaming table is canonical for my game, or what's canonical for the entire World Series? Or where do you draw the line between them? Because in role-playing games, you have to write loosely enough that people can still have their own adventures, but if you're writing a big canonical overarching world, you still have to have a plot line. You still have to tie up loose ends. And how does that factor into things?
Well, are you asking from the standpoint of a publisher or from a game master?
Yes.
Well, there's two different answers.
Because I guess I could say I'm stating from a game master's point of view, because I'm not a publisher. But it's kind of a either-or situation. Is there a big difference between the two? Because we kind of danced around this subject, but tone, theme, everything else comes from the people playing the game. And that's something that we can't really get around, even if you design the game. If you design the game perfectly, with the perfect tone set out and everything's spelled out for the players, they're still going to play however their play style is. Like I said, every single vampire game, no matter, even if I, a storyteller in a vampire game, could not inject that personal horror that White Wolf wanted to inject, even if I wanted to inject it. I threw a D&D group into Ravenloft trying to get that sense of gothic horror, and they still ran around trying to kick in doors and smash goblins.
Mm-hmm. I think if you're talking as a publisher speaking to players, there really isn't a line. It's your game. I set it up for you. Do what you want. But when it comes to further publications or, spin-offs and things like that are actually going to be published or that are going to be enjoyed by other people that aren't part of that gaming group, then it becomes an issue. Like, I have an example. I don't want to hog the conversation, but a few years ago, we were working on a potential low-life cartoon, and I had producers in Hollywood that were promoting it to various studios and stuff, and we optioned it and everything, and it looked like it was actually going to be pretty cool. They pimped it to Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and Disney, and Nickelodeon was actually really interested in it at first. But where I kind of got upset and where they went wrong was pretty much the entire theme of Low Life is that humans are extinct. There are no humans. Society is based on the misconstrued archaeological evidence of the extinct humans. So actually having living humans around would completely ruin everything, basically. But the producers I was working with were saying, oh, no, you have to have humans in the story or else people won't be able to relate to it. And my argument, well, just because this character is evolved from a worm, he still acts like a person. So there's no reason to have humans. But they insisted. So when we promoted it to the studios, there were humans in it. There were only 2. They had somehow been frozen or something and woke up in the future. But to me, it destroyed everything that the story was about in the first place.
You got to say, you're doing it wrong.
I know, but then they're like, yeah, but we're Hollywood. We know what we're doing. And,
no, they don't.
Yeah. And
my God.
I know,
no,
that was
they
the issue. So
don't.
next time we go to promote it, I'm going to put my foot down and just say, no, if you want Low Life, there are no humans. If you want something else, have your humans, but they do not exist in Low Life.
Good on you for sticking to your guns, Andy.
Thank you for that, because I've got to say, I may be the tabletop gaming guy at Andy News, but I still write for Andy Goddamn News, and I'm going to scream to the skies, no, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Well, I think the only time a game should be that heavy-handed on players is when a player is trying to turn off the fun for other players. So, for example, like, we're playing Settlers of Catan, and if I tried to hoard all of the sheep, like, I'm just going to collect every sheep card so nobody else can get me sheep.
Let's go, drinks up, everyone.
I'm not trying to win the game. I'm not even trying to play the game. I'm just trying to turn the fun off for other people. And in that case, the game steps in, the robber makes me discard down, and the game kicks my ass for doing that. But I think the only time a game really should, step up and penalize a player that much is when the player is intentionally trying to turn off the fun, or just have the game break down.
But hopefully at that point the other players would step in, call that guy a dick, and kick him out.
Right.
Well, that's you can't always count on that though. But John does have a good point. That's a great time to, if you're ever gonna say you're doing it wrong, that's not a bad time to do it. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to close the tavern soon because I have a job with the Thieves Guild later on this evening. So,
sweet.
Let's give our guests an opportunity to talk about what they've got coming up in the future and where we can find them on the World Wide Web. Andy, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, obviously, the thing I'm promoting at this very moment, because it's an ongoing Kickstarter, is the new expansions for the Dementalism card game. I'm always self-conscious about promoting my own stuff, but I've been playing this game for a long time, and it really is a blast. You can get the core set with the Kickstarter, as well as the expansions, as well as some miniatures and some promo cards and all kinds of cool stuff. Please check it out, www.dementalism.com. It's part of the Low Life suite of products. We've got a whole line of stuffed animals coming out based on Low Life creatures, which is super cool. A whole line of miniatures. So Dementalism isn't lonely. There's all kinds of fun stuff you can, play with to keep it company and stuff. Also, if I may say, Con on the Cob is next week. And that is a convention that I run, along with some of my friends, in Northern Ohio. So if you're going to be in this area next week for any reason, or heck, even if you're not, make the trip because it's a blast. Check out cononthecob.com. Cob only has one B because it's like corn, not a salad. And it has nothing to do with corn. I just like the name. But anyway, that's what I've got going on right now. So I'm not going to take up any more time, but I really appreciate it if you guys would just take a look at the website there. If you enjoy what you see, consider backing it. If you don't like it, let me know what you don't like about it.
I absolutely encourage you to check out Andy's his stuff. His artwork is just absolutely unique.
Thanks,
congratulations, Dementalism, for succeeding in your Kickstarter. That looks like you did really well on that.
And I have to say, I have not had the fortune to attend Con on the Cob, but it is a blast from every single person I've ever talked to who's attended. So.
My good friend Sean Patrick Fannin has nothing but good things to say about Con on the Cob.
Ask him what I did to his butt last time.
Oh boy. We'll have to.
That
get
sounds
him on the
more
show and ask
ominous
him on
than
the
it
air.
was. But yeah. Next time you talk to Sean, say, "Hey, what did Andy do to your butt at Con on the Cob last year?"
We need to get that answer on the air and get it recorded for sure.
Oh God.
All right. And,
No, I took a Sharpie, and I wrote "Plant your mouth here, my friend" on Sean's butt cheek.
Oh,
I am so glad you were out of my hotel room when I passed out at Comic Palooza.
wow.
Yeah, no, he was awake for that.
All right, so
Yeah.
the lesson learned is do not let Andy write on people's butts.
Or don't pull your pants down in front of me.
Okay.
Cool. So let's see what John's up to.
Yeah, let's do that.
Well, Andy, I mean, you're kind of a hard act to follow here, but you know, all I can say is, you know, check out Alderac.com. Alderac Entertainment Group, AEG, has some really awesome stuff. Unfortunately, I can't talk about much of the things that I'm currently working on because they're all, you know, top secret projects. But there's some really awesome stuff coming up. There's some smash up expansions. I swear this game just keeps on getting more fun and more fun.
Is that possible?
It is possible. And it actually, because the whole nature of the game, you smash up different factions. Like, it makes everything else before that came before even more fun too.
And that game is so much damn fun. If you haven't played it, at least check out the tabletop episode. You'll get an idea of what it's about. It is a brilliantly fun game.
So I guess the only other thing I'd mention too is there's some big in Japan games coming out. My Star and Sail to India, Cheaty Mages, Card of the Dead. There are these great little games that we picked up in Japan that you just get a lot of bang for your buck. I mean, they come in small packages, but there's a lot of awesomeness, a lot of fun. Great things come in small boxes. So stay tuned to the Big in Japan line from AEG. And personally, I will be at BoardGameGeek, the Board Game Geek convention in Texas in November.
Oh,
so
I'll have to stop by and say hi.
Yeah, stop by the Alderac Entertainment booth and please say hi. And I'll be able to run some demos and show you some of the cool stuff coming out. And please feel free to stop by and say hi.
I want to also chime in on John. One of my favorite games that he designed is out, and it's just released, I think, last year. It's called Relic. It's the 40K version of Talisman, and it is a ton of fun. So if you are interested at all in that, also I would recommend you check that out as another example of John's great game design work.
Yeah, and actually, you know, one of the highlights of that was working with the 40K guys, you know, Ross and Sam and Mac and Tim. Yeah, I mean, that truly was a pleasure working in a collaboration like that. So
it's been a pleasure having both of you on. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 2 of You All Meet in a Tavern.
Hello, random stranger who's totally not just me using a different voice.
Well, hello, incredibly handsome stranger.
Hey, have you heard about the new Dementalism Kickstarter? It's totally awesome. It's this really great game, and I know you're going to love it.
Really, tell me more.
Well, see, you play these guys who work for the Primordial Soup Kitchen, and a whole bunch of clones have escaped because of something you did, because you really suck at your job, and you have to go out and collect them before you get fired or fed to something horrible. It's super, super fun, I promise.
Oh yeah? How do I find it?
Oh, it's very, very simple. Just go to www.dementalism.com.
Really? It's that easy?
Yeah, and it's brought to you by Mother Earth Creations, the good people who brought you Low Life and other really awesome stuff.
Dude, you totally have to check that out.
In a world of perilous adventure, the forces of evil have triumphed. Those who remain uncorrupted by wickedness must rely upon monsters to fight against the darkness. Hi, I'm Ross Watson, and I'm talking about my new setting for the Savage Worlds RPG called Accursed. Accursed is a dark fantasy setting where classic monsters team up to fight witches, where the heroes must choose whether to embrace the curse that gives them monstrous power or reject it and try to regain their lost humanity. Check us out at AccursedRPG.com or search for Accursed RPG on Kickstarter. Our campaign runs through October 13th, and we need your support to help make this world come to life.
Thank you for listening to the You All Meet in a Tavern podcast. This podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons, no derivative, non-commercial license. Please visit us at gamerstavern.org, follow us on Twitter at Meet in a Tavern, or like us on Facebook at facebook.com/gamerstavern for even more gaming fun. I would like to personally thank our guests this evening, John Goodenough and Andy Hopp, for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be with us. If you would like to support You All Meet in the Tavern, please visit our sponsors or click on the donate button on our website at gamerstavern.org. Until next time, the tavern is closed.